Hola estudiantes, ¿qué tal? Yo estoy muy bien. So we're going to move on here in a second to 11.2 Instruction 1, maybe one of the most important grammar lessons we're going to have all semester. It's about conjugating verbs that end in AR. So if you haven't already, go ahead and download the notes that are right above the video. If you have a printer, please print those out. It might be easier to fill those in as we go along. If not, you can take some notes on the screen today as you watch the video, because there'll be a few things for you to fill in today as we learn a new skill about conjugating verbs. So I'm going to switch back over to my slides here, and we'll start on 11.2 Instruction 1. So we're going to learn, our lesson today is how do you take a verb and conjugate it in the present tense. I know that sounds like a lot of grammar terminology here, but I'll walk you through this today. And again, it's a really important skill because it's going to allow us to communicate better. All right? So first off, let's go back to what we've been talking about the last couple of videos. What is an infinitive? And remember, the infinitive is nothing more than a basic form of a verb. So in English, an infinitive is always to plus something, like to eat, to run, to swim, etc. Those are what we call infinitives, or we call them infinitivos in Espanol. And again, it's always the most basic form of a verb. All right. What do all Spanish infinitives end in? Well, we've seen in our last couple of videos, they end in either AR, ER, or IR. So like bailar ends in AR, comer ends in ER, and escribir ends in an IR. These are three infinitives we've learned so far this year. So we can easily identify them because all infinitives end in AR, ER, IR. And again, they mean to dance, to eat, to write, etc. All right? So what are some infinitives that we know already? Well, I'm just going to go over here and pull this list up. You've seen this list before, but if you look at this, we've learned quite a few infinitives during the last 10 weeks, all right? This is the list we've been working off of, and by now, these are all the infinitives that you know. So you have quite a bit of vocabulary in your heads, but also you have quite a bit of infinitives that you can use to communicate. So we have that list handy, and we're going to be referring back to that list as the year goes on, all right? So today we're going to learn how you conjugate AR verbs in the present tense. And let's review for a second what we know already. All right? So what is it that the present tense expresses? Well, if I say something like hablo español, all right? Hablo español, the verb hablar is to speak, but what I've just done is I've conjugated hablar to say hablo. And what that means is I speak Spanish, I do speak Spanish, or I am speaking Spanish. That one phrase in Spanish, hablo, actually has three meanings in English. And that's why I've got this 3 equals 1 on the screen, because when you conjugate a verb in the present tense, it'll always mean something like I speak, I do speak, I am speaking, because it conveys regular action, such as I speak. The emphasis on the action is I do speak, and the ongoing action is I am speaking. And any verb in Spanish will always be this way. So, for example, if it's bailo, bailar means to dance. Bailo is I dance, I do dance, or I am dancing. All right. And we'll come back to this 3 equals 1 at the very end of the video today. But that's what the present tense expresses, and that's what I'm going to teach you today is how to say I speak, I do speak, I am speaking. You speak, you do speak, you are speaking. So we're going to learn how to do that today. All right? Verb conjugating is when you change the ending of the verb to match the subject. All right? Now, the nice thing is that regular verbs in Spanish, they all follow a set pattern. Irregular verbs, though, they have a unique conjugation. All right, so think back to ser and tener. The verbs we're going to learn today are much easier than those two because ser, we know, means to be. It doesn't follow a pattern at all. Soy, eres, es, somos, soy, son. We had to memorize those. Well, tener is the same way. Tener means to have. It doesn't follow a pattern. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, etc. We had to memorize those because it doesn't follow a pattern. What I'm going to show you today, though, is something much, much simpler that applies to verbs that are regular. All right, we're going to learn today to conjugate verbs. All right, so we're going to learn how do you take the verb hablar, and we know hablar means to speak. How do I take that and say, I speak Spanish? Or you speak Spanish, or he speaks Spanish, she speaks Spanish, we speak Spanish, Juan and Sarah speak Spanish. How do you go from hablar to be able to express what various people do, such as I or you? So we'll learn how to do that today, all right? Well, maybe you're thinking, well, why? Who cares? All right? Why can't I, why do we need to do this? Why does this matter? Well, it matters is because we can't say something like this. I to speak Spanish. All right? That doesn't make any sense. All right? We want to say I speak Spanish. So we have to learn how to go from hablar, to speak, to be able to say I speak. Or we can't go around saying Sarah to speak Spanish. All right? That doesn't make any sense. We need to learn how to say Sarah speaks Spanish. All right? That's called conjugating. All right? Or we can't go around saying my friends and I to speak. All right? That doesn't make any sense. We need to be able to say my friends and I speak Spanish. So how do you do that? How do you conjugate these verbs that are regular in the present tense to be able to make that happen? Well, I'm going to teach you today how to do that. So we're going to jot down a few notes, and there are 3 steps to do this. All right? This is how you conjugate any verb in Spanish that ends in AR that is regular. The first step is you have to drop the AR from the infinitive, and you're left with what's called a stem. So look at the verb hablar. All right, hablar is the infinitive, right? Hablar means to speak. So the first step says drop that AR. So over here I've got HABL. My AR is gone. So we do that for any verb that's regular that ends in AR. That's our first step. Our second step is we have to identify the subject in the sentence. So is the subject I speak? Is the subject you? Is the subject he? Is it Sarah? Is it we? Is it Juan and Sarah? So who is the subject? We have to know that to know what to do next. So for example, let's say that you're trying to say I speak or I talk Spanish. Well, the subject would be I. If you're trying to say Juan speaks Spanish, the subject would be Juan. If you're trying to say my friends and I speak Spanish, the subject would be my friends and I. All right, so we have to know that. And then the last step is we have to add the correct ending onto the stem. All right, so if you remember in the first step, we took the AR, we got rid of it, and we were left with HABL. All right, well, we said the subject is I, so we're trying to say I speak Spanish. So I added an O here. Well, where did that O come from? Well, I want you to jot these down. These are going to be so important from this point forward, because anytime you try to take a verb that ends in AR and conjugate it, these are the endings that you would add to it. So let's say that you're trying to say I speak, you'd have to go HABL, we got rid of the AR, you would add the O, and the O would communicate I speak. Well, the to form is AS, all right? So AS would be you speak. So if I were to say hablas, hablas means you speak, you do speak, or you are speaking. Let's say the subject is él, ella, usted. Well, in that case, we would add an A. So we would say habla. Habla would mean he speaks or she speaks, or also you formal. On the plural side, if the subject is we, and we're trying to say we speak, we would add the ending AMOS. So hablamos means we speak. In Spain, they would say AIS with an accent on the A, like habláis. All of you speak. And then they speak, or all of you speak, would be an. We would add the ending AN. All right? So these 6 endings are so important. O, as, a, amos, ais, an. And by knowing these, for any verb that ends in AR and is regular, it's always going to work the same way. Now, Sarah and Tanner, remember, they were weird. We had to memorize those, all 6 forms. Not here. If you know your endings like you see on the screen in yellow, these are the endings you're always going to use with verbs that end in AR that are regular. Okay? So let's just see an example. All right, we've been using hablar for my model here. So remember, the first step is I drop the AR, identify the subject in the second step, and then I add the ending. So to say I speak, that's hablo. So hablo español. To say you speak would be hablas. All right? Or if you're asking a question, you would say, ¿hablas español? Do you speak Spanish? All right? To say he or she speaks is habla. To say you formal speak is habla. On the plural side, all right, nosotros hablamos. Vosotros, all of you, habláis. They speak, hablan. And all of you speak, hablan. So what I did was, just to kind of recap, I started with hablar, I dropped the AR, and then I added the endings according to the subject. And as you add those different endings, those endings are going to communicate different subjects. So hablo is I talk, hablas is you talk, etc. All right. any verb I give you from our vocab list that ends in AR that's regular will always behave the same way. You'll do the exact same process. So let's see if we can put some of this together and try to communicate. All right, so yo is the subject, hablar is the infinitive. How would you communicate I speak, I do speak, or I am speaking? Well, hopefully you're writing down hablo. I drop the AR and I add the O because the O goes along with the yo form. Yo estudiar. So how would I communicate I study, I do study, or I am studying? Well, I drop the AR and I'm going to add an O again because we know that's the ending for the yo subject. All right, tu mirar. So how would you say you watch, you do watch, or you are watching? Well, hopefully you would say tu miras. All right, tu miras. You watch, you do watch, or you are watching. Those three meanings are going to come across. Ella escuchar. Well, ella escucha. That would mean she listens, she does listen, or she is listening. All right? Ellos necesitar. They need would be ellos necesitan. All right? They need, they do need, or they are needing. All three of those meanings. Ustedes llegar would be ustedes llegan. All of you arrive, you do arrive, or you are arriving. Señor Peeper, enseñar. So how will we say señor teaches, señor does teach, or señor is teaching? Enseña. All right? And let's try one more. Mis amigos y yo tomar apuntes. So how would I say my friends and I take notes, we do take notes, or we are taking notes? Mis amigos y yo tomamos apuntes. All right? So any verb that ends in AR that's regular will always follow the same pattern, which makes this so much easier than ser and tener because they were irregular. All right, so coming back to that math problem, that weird math problem, 3 equals 1, remember anytime you do this, in Spanish, there's only one verb, like for example, señor habla, but in English, that habla could mean one of 3 things. All right, anytime you, so if I were to say, translate for me, señor habla, well, you could say señor speaks, señor is speaking, or señor does speak. It'll always have 3 meanings back into English. Okay? All right, tú hablas español would be like saying you speak, you are speaking, or you do speak. Okay? Now finally, Spanish verbs contain a lot of information in the verb ending. And what I mean by the verb ending, I mean the o, the as, the a, the amos, the is, or the an. What really is cool about Spanish is you can look at the verb bailo, which is conjugated, right? Bailo. And since you know that o is there, that automatically tells you the subject is I. All right, just because of knowing that the yo form corresponds to the o. Or if you look at bailamos, all right, the A-M-O-S, if that's all you see is bailamos, you know automatically the subject has to be we, nosotros, because that's the ending for the nosotros form. Okay? So I know this is a little bit longer of a video, but this is such an important concept, and this is one that we really do want to make sure we master and get right from the beginning. So I'm going to let you work on some SWICs here, then I'll come back in a second video once you move on, and we'll do a little bit of an instruction too, once I know for sure you've had some chance to work on this and to practice a little bit to make sure you've got this down. So if you have any questions, let me know. This is one you may need to watch a couple of times just to kind of get down because this is something that's going to set us up for as long as you study Spanish. So good job making it through to the end here. I hope everything was nice and crystal clear, but if not, as always, reach out and let me know. Hasta luego!